Welcome to our webinar on data centers, powering the green and digital transition in Europe. We apologize a bit for being late. We had some technical issues, I want to thank greatly to all of you for taking the time to join our discussion today and for bearing with us. My name is Claudia German, and I'm a policy manager for green and digital transformation at Digital Europe, and I will be moderating today's discussion. It goes without saying that data centers are key enablers of the twin transition in Europe. Digital services are empowering businesses across all sectors in the economy to innovate, enhance efficiency, develop sustainable services and technologies, and meet their own ambitious climate targets in line with the European Green Deal goals. The emission reductions delivered in these sectors through digital innovation would not be possible without data centers. Data centers are the one providing the efficient computational power needed. The data center industry has committed significant resources to their own sustainability efforts. It also contributes to the EU's climate goals through, for example, clean energy procurement, ambitious targets for energy efficiency, use of clean energy, water conservation, and circular economy. As a matter of fact, data centers are themselves already one, if not the most advanced end-use sector in terms of both progress on decarbonizing their own operations and in setting ambitious commitments to becoming climate neutral. Some of these areas will be touched upon during our discussion today. We have a great lineup for what will be a thought-provoking debate on data centers and their role in the green and digital transition in Europe. Data centers have been a hot topic for the past years, and for sure, such an opportunity to further clarify some aspects is most welcome. In the next 15 minutes, Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, Director General of Digital Europe, and Pernille Weiss, member of the European Parliament and our co-host today, will set the scene for the debate. They will share some of their views on the role of data centers in the twin transition. Then, for about 1 hour, our panelists will provide us with some diverse perspectives from institutional, national, academic, and company viewpoints. I'm very happy to have by my virtual side today, Thomas Ditlev, Vice President for Global Research and Development at Asetek, Rikke Hougaard Zeberg, Director at DI Digital, Nikolaos Kontinakis, Policy Officer at the European Commission, Dr. Eric Mazenet, Professor and Chair of Sustainability Science for Emerging Technologies at University of California, Santa Barbara, and Jake Oster, Head of Energy and Environment Policy EMEA at Amazon. In the meantime, do take the opportunity to ask questions in the chat. Towards the end of the discussion, I will choose a few questions and address them to our panelists. Cecilia, thank you very much for being with us today. I will hand over to you for the next 5 to 7 minutes to share with our participants today a few insights on how we can use digital infrastructure to advance our climate goals in Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much to Pernille Weiss and her team also for co-organizing this event. It's excellent platform for basically having a discussion on the energy consumption of data centers, but also how data centers can actually enable some of the green transition that we need to go through towards 2030. So Digital Europe, you might know us, most of you. We are the organization that represents digital on the European level. We have around 36,000 members, digital companies, from health companies to manufacturing companies, over, of course, the traditional tech companies. We have taken quite a leadership in actually looking at how technology can bring down CO2 emissions broadly, and only a few months ago we published a paper called Digital Climate Action is Digital Action, and amongst others looking at how the emerging technologies can bring down CO2 consumption in some of the most polluting sectors. If we look at the potential, we know that emerging technologies like AI and other technologies can actually contribute with around 30 to 40, between 20 and 30% of global CO2 reductions across different sectors. And according to Jesse, there is a potential for reductions in CO2. If you look at the data centers, they play, you know, a really important role, and they have the potential of actually reducing 10 times more CO2 than they actually produce. We have a few examples in the publication that I would like to mention. One of them, for example, being Siemens, where they have helped the city of Vienna to apply digital twins and artificial intelligence into buildings. Buildings actually stand for 40% of Europe's CO2 emissions, so really a major polluter. And by really monitoring both how you build buildings, but also how you renovate them and how they consume energy after they are renovated, you can they have actually been able to bring down CO2 emissions with 71%, which is really, really a lot. We know now that it's every parameter that from the start, when you actually built the building, you know, how do you actually turn the windows against the sun? How do you do the insulation? How do you install the light? And of course, also when you have done this digital twin of the building, you can actually monitor the operations of the building afterwards. So if something goes wrong and you see the energy consumption all of a sudden going up, you can actually make sure that you counter that error in the system. Another thing is another company is Cisco, where they have helped the port of Rotterdam. If you imagine the ships when they come from faraway places, many times they have to wait outside the ports. They cannot find a place where they can dock, or they have to have longer routes towards the harbors due to wind and weather, etc. But actually, if they have the artificial intelligence and they can monitor the energy consumption and the correct sustainable route, then they can bring down around 50% of their carbon emission. There are plenty of examples like this, and one, of course, being also agriculture, being one of the absolute biggest polluters. One of the issues we face there is that around 40% of the rural areas simply don't have the connectivity to basically apply artificial intelligence, analyze big amounts of data. And this means that they are using too much fertilizer, that they are using too much energy. So without basically a big investment in both connectivity to be able to enable the farmers to use the data and to optimize their energy consumption, and of course also their fertilizer and other energy consuming products, we will fail to do so. I can mention many other examples, but maybe turning to data centers right now. As I said, buildings, for example, is around 40% of Europe's energy consumption, whereas data centers themselves is around 1 to 2%. Well, it means two things. It's not a major issue compared to many of the other issues we have. However, of course, with the amount of data that is being processed and in the increase in, for example, streaming of video, we see just in 2020, of course, being a COVID year, there was an increase in use of video streaming with around 40%. Of course, both with what we do here, but also entertainment, gaming, social networking. With that rapid increase of digital technologies, of course, we need to stay on the forefront. And I think one of the things that we can say is that the data centers, it's the tech companies that have been leading the game in how to bring down their own energy consumption. It's expensive and it's polluting. And there's a big commitment from the sector basically to keep at the forefront of this development, but also to share the developments of how this can be done, in other sectors. Renewable energy, reuse of heat, and many other things are some of the things that many of our members are actually looking at. So with that, I would say the digital transformation of society will definitely continue. With that, we will have more data processing, and we will have more consumption on digital services, and with that, of course, an increase in data and the need for much more capacities in the data centers. However, we need to look at the trade-off. So how do we get the maximum trade-off of what the data centers can actually create of an efficiency for other sectors, whether that, for example, are the renewable energy sector, or, as I said, buildings or agriculture? And how do we make sure that the knowledge on how to keep down the energy consumption in the data centers is also used in other sectors to research and development and how this can be done? With that, Digital Europe for sure is very much committed. We published in 2019 our manifesto, and you will see in the manifesto there is a 7 points. It's called digital, and definitely the G is green. So since 2018 and 19, we have had dedicated groups basically working with how we can bring down pollution, bring down CO2 emissions, improve energy efficiency, and of course also our own. So with that, I will hand over to Pernille. Pernille, I also know that it's a big discussion in the Parliament, and of course, it's the major strategy of the green and digital transformation. And thank you so much for taking the leadership also in the Parliament on this. Over to you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this very important meeting today, Friday. While you were talking, I was thinking actually about my childhood, because I was puzzled about why is it that energy efficiency is something that really hit my heart, and it did it from very early on, because I come from a farm where we had an oil boiler in the kitchen, very central placed, just next to the stove. So when I came home from school, it was a long ride on the bike. In the winter, I was, of course, very cold, but I could then sit on top of the heat boiler because it was placed in the kitchen, talking with my parents. And if I didn't do, my sister did. And if she didn't do, then my mother put on the top of the oil boiler our wet laundry to dry. So being energy efficient and really make the maximum use of the heat in every kind of system is related to common sense. And that's why I'm very happy that I'm the shadow rapporteur of the recasting of the Energy Efficiency Directive right now, being active as a part of the Fit for 55 work going on in the European Parliament, Fit for 55, which are the 13 directives being either revised or designed from a bottom-up approach to make the Union actually possible to reach the climate goals of 2030 mostly. So yes, I'm very happy to be with you today. Yesterday, I spoke at an equal important webinar, which was also very much interlinked with the topic today on data centers, namely a webinar on district heating and cooling. Here I had a very fruitful discussion of the reuse of waste heat and in the energy systems. And earlier also in this week, I moderated another interlinked webinar on energy efficiency in the water sector. How much more perfect then is it to round up this week's webinar with one on data centers, because the efficient interplay between the water sector, the district heating and cooling sector, and the data centers has the opportunity to really accelerate the green transition. And there is indeed a need to further integrate data centers into the energy system, as also Cecilia has already addressed. While on the one hand, data centers are beautiful, or maybe not that much, it depends on who you ask, or the architect who has been allowed to play a little bit with the with the concept and the layout. The data centers are actually the picture of the digital transition that will drive the green and must drive the green transition. But also, as also addressed by Cecilia, they are very energy demanding already, and that will only be increasing because we are digitalizing our societies as we do both in Europe but also globally. And we all know that the energy need in this world will only for the next 20 years be going upwards. So we really need to use our energy very, very wisely, and by that doing it efficiently. With the revision of the energy efficiency directive now on our table, we need to create a stable legal framework that sets good conditions for the integration of renewables, optimization of the infrastructure, the reuse of the water, reuse of waste heat, and sector integration. While we shall, of course, not create too many burdens for the data centers, I agree on that, Cecilia. We need to find the right balance. We must also maintain the high ambitions because solutions that are already out there, we need to make the best use of them. And luckily, I know that we have today some very interesting and forward-looking companies and stakeholders with us, and I look very much therefore forward to hear what you see as the biggest obstacles and also the best solutions for the greening of the data centers. Also, I would very much like to invite the stakeholders and panelists to address how can we, in the way we work with the digital transformation and the green transformation of our union, improve the competitiveness of both the green and the digital sectors in Europe. Because EU Green Deal was announced in 2019 as a growth strategy. So the way we work with our digital and green sectors in many different complex systems, we need to make our economy grow. So how also can we, in the way that we do this work together, how can we also make some strong arguments and role models, best practices, where the export of European solutions to the global market is also growing, that I would very much like to hear about, also in the framework of a political ambition to make the EU the best place for both digital enterprises of all sizes, of course, together alongside with all the green technologies and SMEs, to co-create and be the best continent in the world to grow and develop the business. So on that foot, I will now sit and listen to what the experts and panelists have of good suggestions for my office to continue working on. Oh, maybe I should just say that we expect in the end of next week or the beginning of the week number 8 to receive the draft report from the rapporteur on the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive. And I will have, together with my shadow colleagues, until March 8 to write our proposals for amendments. So also a good reason to remember the International Women's Day, March 8, is that it's also the deadline for amendments. So whoever has a good idea, please bring it forward, send it to my office, and we will look into it right now in these weeks ahead. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Mrs. Weiss, I also thank you and your team very much for co-hosting with Digital Europe this timely debate on data centers.
They are so great, these young people.
And I also thank you for your reflections. I do hope that some of the questions you asked will be answered during today's debate. Thank you very much, Cecilia, as well, for your reflections and for sharing all those relevant facts with us. Let's move now into the second part of our discussion today, and to take actually a deep dive into some of the aspects mentioned by Cecilia and Pernille earlier. We listened to the views from the European Parliament. Let's continue with the institutional perspective, this time from the European Commission side. And I will move now towards Nicolas. Nicolas, welcome. I'm just wondering, maybe you could share with us what are some of the ambitions of the European Commission when it comes to improving the energy efficiency and circular economy performance in cloud computing and data centers in Europe. I will leave it to you now.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And thank you very much for the invitation, for the initiative to organize this webinar. I think it's a topic that is very high in the agenda of many people in Brussels right now, that we are discussing the 55 package. And I would like to thank for what we heard already. I think they cover many topics that I would like also to talk about. So as everybody in the webinar may know, there is in the proposal for the EED recast, there is some new provisions that talk about data centers. So we try to introduce some new things about data centers. And I think what is our ambition is more or less identical with what we heard already, either as a wish or as a reality. I mean, so as European Commission, of course, we see both that that ICT in general has a great potential of creating savings, energy savings, and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. All the numbers, all the studies, of course, point to that direction. And that's why we think that, and that's why we're talking about a dual transition, right? It's not only the green, but also the digital transition, and in tandem, not just in parallel. Just to mention one thing right now, for example, in DG Energy, there is in progress the development of an action plan on the digitalization of energy, where exactly we see very clearly this dimension of how ICT will help the energy system and how it is necessary to integrate the energy system with the digital world, or the other way around. But also how to do it in a way that is sustainable. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to happen what happened 100 years ago with the private car, for example, where first we developed and then first we deployed and then we said, and now let's see how this could happen in a sustainable way. But I think we have the knowledge and the wisdom to try to do it at the same time. That said, as it was already mentioned, one thing is to promote ICT and how it can help us. Another thing is to see how this can happen sustainably. Now, as a Commission, we see, of course, that ICT and especially data centers are very dynamic, and very dynamic not only in terms of development, but very dynamic in terms of technological evolution. I mean, one generation, one building from the neighboring one could be totally new technology, totally new ideas implemented. In that sense, also, we share the view that any approach should be rather light or very well based in very well evidence, and before we go and do something that looks like a lot of red tape. And that's why in the EED, what we have proposed for the moment is a reporting obligation, as you know, basically. And that for us also, it's a very important point, because right now, if we ask around even the simplest question, how many data centers do we have in Europe? Most probably there is no one that can reply this simple question with precision. Not then to go to questions like what is even the average, for example, efficiency or use of fresh water, or how much renewables do we use for data centers, etc. So as a first step, we think it's important to get there, to have this information, to add transparency, and to make this information public, so that we can elaborate then what to do next, what should be the next steps. Of course, as Commission, as you know, I mean, this is just a small step. I mean, we have also other things that we are doing in parallel. I mentioned already the action plan for the digitalization of energy. As you know, for many years now, we have the code of conduct that is run by JRC. There are many elements, for example, in the eco-design regulation, especially, of course, when it comes to the equipment. There are recently, for example, there was a study by our colleagues in DigiConnect about energy efficient cloud computing. There are elements in the taxonomy, in the EU Green Public Procurement criteria, for example. So there is a whole set of instruments, right, that try to help the sector be more sustainable. And just to close, I mean, of course, because one more reason, because you know, data centers right now are, they hit the news more often than before, and we think it's both for good and for bad reason. Good meaning how they help or how they develop or how they bring technology or quality jobs in Europe, but in the bad also, I mean, we cannot fail to see all this publicity about Bitcoin mining and what does it mean, or the stress in the electricity systems of maybe Ireland or the Paris region, for example, or whether some of the mining has moved to Sweden and Norway. Okay, maybe it's not EU 27, but it's very close to us, to our example. And what does this mean, for example, for their renewable production? So again, we think at least we should start from somewhere. What we do with the EED proposal is at least to add this layer of transparency, of reporting, so that then we can all together see how we could, with the sector, of course, I mean the data center sector, how we can move faster to sustainable solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. You mentioned the proposal for the Energy Efficiency Directive. I'll get back to you on that for some more details later on. Rikke, allow me to ask you about the perspective of a member state. What measures has Denmark been taking to ensure that data centers become green and sustainable in Denmark?
Thank you, first of all, very much for the invitation. And I'll try to give a national perspective into the discussion. And Denmark is already, especially compared to our size, an important data center country. Most of the big tech companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft have already placed data centers in Denmark. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, we have a high security in supply of electricity. Secondly, there's a stable political system. And third, then we have, not to brag, but we have an excellent tel infrastructure to and from Denmark. And then we are blessed with a mild climate with ideal temperatures. It's not too cold and it's not too hot. And that means that not much need for cooling facilities compared to warm countries. And then we also, for the fifth reason, we have a well-functioning, stable and agile labor force. And not at least, we have a high amount of green energy. So we see ourselves a green energy country with a major part of our energy coming from sustainable energy sources like windmills. And now there was some question about how much the data center consume energy consumption, and we expect that data centers will consume 10 to 20% of Denmark's total energy consumption by 2030. So it's quite a lot. And in Denmark, we're working very hard now to salute the sector coupling, meaning solving the influx from many decentralized energy supply sources, channeling the energy to the many demanding units. So it's our viewpoint that the data centers, of course, should be a part of the sector coupling, meaning that the waste heat from data centers should be used in the local district heating systems, or in other kind of industries that need heating, like for instance, greenhouses or fish farming or other thing. The most important thing is that the location of the data centers should be planned near to other industries that actually can receive and utilize the waste heat from data centers in a sustainable way. So the Danish data center industries is already having a certification scheme for green data center solutions. This creates an overview of sustainable solutions in data centers, create industry benchmarks, expose green projects, and hereby in the long run also pushes the demand and supply for more green data center solutions. So like everything else, we strongly recommend that the actions is also in this area are harmonized with the rest of the EU. Then there's an issue about the changing law concerning tax on waste heating. It's another very important element. Earlier, waste heat was taxed rather hard, but recently the taxation in this area has been eased a bit. I say a bit, because we expect further progress in this area, and it's very important that this is going to happen. So besides that, we in Denmark very much supporting the work done in the EU on more green energy solutions, eco-designs, etc. And we in our member companies very much welcome harmonized rules and laws in this area across EU. So if we ask what some of the challenges of the data center operators in Denmark has in keeping data centers sustainable, then we have to say one of the biggest challenges is how to find the right size of the community that shall receive the waste heat. So some local communities and local district heating wish to receive waste heat, but may be only a minor part of the waste heats actually come from the data center. So what do we do with the rest? Therefore, so-called heat maps, comprehensive assessments are highly relevant to be able to tap into the potential of sector coupling, as I was talking about before. So the status right now is that the data centers themselves have to look around and search for a local district heating partner that can actually receive just the amount of waste heat that the specific data center is able to supply. It will be also a good idea to introduce labeling schemes for data centers and data storage products. For example, green, yellow, or red smileys, just like we can know it from refrigerators or other electric products. And then reporting obligations should also be clearly defined. New and more durable equipment sometimes cost 2 to 3 times more than standard equipment, but their lifetime means that they are much more sustainable. For instance, generators and cooling compressors in average last for 20 years. It's also a matter of building the data centers for the future, forecasting the future needs in the long run, for instance, 10 years, in order to avoid to have to change the equipment and materials because of a short life cycle. Then certification schemes for all data centers and data storage products, like I said, smileys for electric goods. It will be a huge push to the market because everybody wishes to buy the most green and sustainable solution. And we would actually very rapidly could make huge changes in this area if the EU started to play this kind of request. So we think that the major changes could happen very fast then. Actually, many of our member companies also think that debate focus too much on the waste heat and how it can be diminished and used in the district heating system, and too little on all the other elements included, like more sustainable data storage products. So the companies need EU standards to avoid the fragmentation across Europe, and the problem now is that all member states go ahead on their own without a harmonized approach. So it means that it is too difficult to extend the uses of the most green and sustainable solutions. And public procurement is also important in this respect. So finally, we should also consider to place much more importance on sustainable and less energy consuming software and programming, and not only focus on the hardware, but also on the software. And this also includes energy saving storage of data and behavioral changes, not at least. Use the energy when it's green and reduce the activities in the peak periods, as also mentioned.
Thank you very much, Rikke. You actually anticipated another question that I was going to ask you about the challenges that the data centers do face in Denmark. And yeah, some work has been done. It seems like some work is still ahead of us. Thank you very much for your reflections. There has also been some groundbreaking research done, and I'm happy to have with us today a well-known voice in the academic sphere. Eric, thank you very much for joining from across the Atlantic. I know it's quite early over there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. That's why I'm drinking quite a bit of coffee. I hope I don't come across as too sleepy.
You're all set for our discussion today. That's
Yes.
what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you if you can share with us some key findings from your research on data center energy use and energy efficiency.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so. And I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to join you today. As an academic who studies data center energy use, we always learn a lot from the sort of perspectives that are discussed at events like these. So I want to start by saying in the academic community, we rely heavily on publicly available data when we estimate the energy use of data centers and efficiency trends. So before I answer the question, I just want to provide some important context on what we know and what we don't know about data centers when it comes to publicly available data. And from the perspective of publicly available data, one can divide the data center industry into three major categories. The first category are the large hyperscale cloud data centers, which can often be very large, tens of megawatts, sometimes even more than 100 megawatts of installed IT capacity. Second category is co-location data centers. So for these two types of data centers, we can often make reasonable estimates, not perfect estimates, but reasonable estimates based on public reports coming from the companies, coming from analyst reports that study the co-location market, or even sometimes coming from permits that are filed for operating large data centers. So for those two categories, we see energy growth clearly in the last several years. There's no doubt about that. But there's an important third category, which is a lot more difficult to analyze. And this is what we can think of as on-premises data centers. So these are data centers that are often much smaller, but they're operated by many companies around the world. There are hundreds of thousands of these. I've seen estimates that there could be even millions of these on-premises data centers. And we don't have a lot of information on these data centers because they're operated privately, often within existing buildings by many, many companies who don't report on data center energy use. So the important thing to understand when we talk about any sort of estimates of data center energy use or efficiency trends is that these are all estimates coming from analysts like me and other groups around the world who are doing our best to use models to piece together a lot of imperfect information. We make a lot of assumptions, we fill a lot of data gaps, and that means there's a lot of variance in the numbers that you'll see out there. So while I'm happy to discuss the results that I and my colleagues have come up with, I want to acknowledge that different research teams have arrived at different estimates for the amount of energy use that data centers use globally, in Europe, in China. And this relates to using different data sources, different methodologies, and different assumptions. And all of this is driven by a chronic lack of data that we don't have in the public domain. And that's a problem I'd like to discuss a bit later today. So for example, when it comes to the European Union, it's a wonderful report that came out recently from the European Commission, which estimated European data centers, meaning the EU 28, consume around 77 terawatt hours. In my research, along with my US colleagues, we used a global model. Our estimate for Europe, which included Eastern, Western, and Central Europe, so perhaps a different scope, came up with a number of about 45 terawatt hours. And you know, that's a significant difference. And it's difficult to resolve those differences without having better public data on the energy use of data centers. But the good news is we can use these differences to learn from each other and to hopefully work towards better practices. So analytical practices. So getting back to your original question, my first observation from my own work and by looking at the literature is that it's pretty likely that data centers account for about 1, maybe up to 2% of global electricity demand. So this is a range consistent with what Cecilia mentioned earlier. And that's not at all surprising given just how important data centers are to pretty much every aspect of modern life. It should be acknowledged, though, that the situation can be much different at the local level. So we saw in the chat that the energy use of data centers in Ireland is getting a lot of attention. It's potentially becoming a problem. So at the local scale, data centers can create significant burdens on the grid and for local water supplies. So really, you know, the contribution of data centers to energy use has to be looked at local levels as well as regional levels. So we think roughly 1 to 2% at the global level, but there's risk that that number could go up. Now, when it comes to the energy efficiency of data centers, I think most analysts agree that without the historical efficiency gains we've seen in the sector, that today's energy use would be a lot larger than it is if we didn't have the efficiency gains that we've seen in the past. In our own research, we estimated, and an important caveat is that our most recent study was a global study, and we looked retrospectively. So we were looking at the period 2010 to 2018, where there was large growth in the internet, large growth in the number of data centers. We estimated that the annual efficiency gains measured as the energy use the average energy use per workload globally decreased by around 20%, somewhere in that ballpark, which is a pretty impressive improvement rate. So it's an energy efficiency improvement rate that is greater than pretty much any other energy demand sector we can think of. And that had to do with a lot of innovation occurring in the industry. So we attributed those efficiency gains to 3 primary effects. The first effect was just energy efficiency increases in servers, storage devices, and network switches that occurred over that time period. And these are the sort of efficiency gains that, you know, all of us can observe. For example, if we look at our smartphones, right? Our smartphones today use a lot less power and provide a lot more functionality than they did 10 years ago. The same is true of IT hardware and data centers. The second effect was more widespread use of virtualization. This means running fewer servers to host workloads by running those servers at higher levels of utilization, meaning each workload requires less energy under that approach. And then the third effect was that we saw many workloads moving from smaller on-premises data centers and towards more efficient cloud data centers. So these were our best estimates. We do feel in the past decade, there were strong efficiency gains. It wasn't enough to keep, data center energy use overall, flat. We estimated that there was moderate growth. Other analyst groups estimated stronger growth. But I think as a collection within the research community, it was a pretty robust finding that there were strong efficiency gains without which data centers would use a lot more energy today than they do. And lastly, I'll just say that we are in need of more recent studies because our work in particular, our period ended in 2018. So those efficiency effects that I mentioned, we're looking at the last decade. But now we're in a different world. When we look at the large data centers, when we look at the colo market, it's clear that energy use in those sectors is rising. We still don't quite understand what's happening in all the enterprise and small data centers that don't report. So we need to get a better understanding of those. But the world is more connected. We're using Zoom a lot more. We have a lot more telework and so forth. So we really need to get a sense of where energy use is going and what remaining efficiency potential there is out there, because a lot of the effects I mentioned were strong in the last decade, but we're not sure how long they'll persist.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that download of information and also putting them so that a layman person can understand. So maybe building on what you just said, Eric, I will just move to a company perspective. And actually, I will kindly ask Jake, on your side as AWS, Jake, how are you ensuring that data centers are sustainable?
Yeah, thank you. And let me also echo the thanks to Digital Europe and to the other panelists. We appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation. And of course, thank you to Digital Europe for organizing this. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about sustainability and data centers and the twin transition. So thank you for putting together this great forum and inviting the panelists to come speak. Let me start by talking a little bit about Amazon as a whole and that our commitment to building a sustainable business for our employees, our customers, and our communities. In 2019, we co-founded the Climate Pledge, and we became the first signatory. And with the Climate Pledge, what we did was we committed to be net zero carbon by 2040. And we also realized that we would work stronger together if we encouraged other companies to join us and make a similar commitment to be net zero carbon by 2040. So we co-founded the Climate Pledge in 2019. And as of today, we have more than 200 companies that have joined on as signatories to take a similar commitment to be net zero carbon by 2040. For us, as part of our effort to be net zero carbon, we've talked a lot about energy today. we have a goal to be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2030. And we're actually now on a path to be 100% renewable by 2025, which is 5 years ahead of our scheduled goal. As of 2020, Amazon became the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. And I know there was a mention earlier about the sector being a leader in renewable energy purchasing and renewable energy procurement. And of course, PPAs and renewable energy have been a priority as part of the Green Deal and as part of the Renewable Energy Directive. We at Amazon have now announced 274 wind and solar projects around the world. Altogether, it's 12 gigawatts of capacity. Here in Europe, we have 3.7 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. It's large-scale wind and solar projects that are in Ireland, Spain, France, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Italy, the Netherlands. And some of those are even some really interesting offshore projects that we've talked about in places too. Altogether, our renewable energy investments are enough to be the equivalent to power 9 million average European homes. That's roughly the amount to eliminate 13.7 million metric tons of carbon emissions each year. So that's some of the work we're doing on renewable energy as far as powering our global infrastructure with clean energy. We also, I know, talked a little bit about water conservation, and I want to talk to you a little about what we're doing with water, because we at AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is a part of Amazon and runs the data centers and the cloud computing business at Amazon, we know that water is a precious resource, right? And so we're committed to conserving and reusing water. And so in many of our regions, which are what our data center regions are called, we're using outside air cooling for a lot of the year, which means we're only needing water for the hottest days for our cooling. And even then, we're optimizing the water we use in our systems to really be a minimal amount of water. Let me give you an example from here, one of our data center regions in Europe. So in Ireland, we're using direct evaporative cooling systems, and that means 95% of the year, we're using no water to cool our data centers in Ireland. And thanks to innovative cooling technology, our newest data center designs can use as little as 1,000 cubic meters of water for cooling annually. To put that into an understandable framework, because I don't know water by cubic meters, and I'm guessing other people don't either. That's roughly the equivalent of the average annual usage of 8 Irish households. In addition, we are outfitting our new facilities with roofs that are designed to harvest rainwater, so we can then further offset any use of water used from the local supply. Now that we've talked about water and we've talked about clean energy, let me get to energy efficiency, which of course is so much of what we're here to talk about today, right? Is reducing energy consumption. We know that the lowest carbon energy is the energy we don't use. That's why for us, we are and have been laser focused on improving energy efficiency in every aspect of our infrastructure. So for us, that's the infrastructure that powers our servers. It's the techniques we use to cool our data centers. It's also the innovative server designs that we have to provide services to our customers. For us, energy efficiency is key to every part of our global infrastructure. Let me give you some really specific examples, and maybe it'll touch on a little bit of what Eric was talking about with research that he's seeing in the hardware and the IT equipment. So for us, we removed the large uninterruptible power supplies, or UPS devices, from our data center design, and instead we're moving to use small battery packs and custom power supplies that we integrate into the rack. And that improves our power efficiency and increases our availability. And what's important to understand there is every time power is converted from one voltage to another, or from AC to DC or vice versa, some of the power is lost in that conversion process. And so when you eliminate that central UPS, we reduce the amount of conversions. And when we optimize our rack power supplies to reduce that energy loss and that final conversion altogether, we're able to reduce energy conversion loss by about 35% by making those changes. So you can see how those small hardware choices can be really impactful and really important. Another example for us is, when we're building hardware with sustainability in mind. And so we've announced our newest ARM processor, Gravitron 3. It's the 3rd generation of our ARM-based processors. And this is currently the most power efficient processor at AWS, and it's using up to 60% less energy for the same performance for comparable instances or workloads. And in addition to energy reduction, Gravitron's also offering 25% faster speeds and boosted performance. And it's great for cryptographic or machine learning workloads. And so these are remarkable improvements in both power and efficiency, of course. And that gives you a sense of all of the work we're doing across energy efficiency, water optimization and mineralization, as well as, of course, renewable energy, which is such a core part of our goal to be net zero carbon by 2040, which is a big piece of our sustainability commitments. So it gives you an overview, hopefully, of what we're doing at AWS on sustainability, and eager to participate in the rest of the conversation. So thank you again for hosting this.
Thank you very much, Jake, for sharing all these insights with us. I will stay in the realm of companies and actually move to Thomas to ask him how is Asetek contributing to the sustainability efforts of data centers?
Yes, I can only second the thank you of being able to participate in this. I'm not sure how many of you actually know what Asetek is, but we're a small technical company in the very northern part of Denmark. And we have a 20-year history of cooling different computers and data centers with water instead of air. And I was actually quite pleased to hear some of my fellow panelists here describing a lot of the things, starting up with Rikke, mentioning that 10 to 20% of the Danish energy consumption is actually going just to running data centers. I have a number saying 17, so thank God we're at the same range here, Rikke. And 17% is actually quite a lot in a small company like Denmark. And what we do at Asetek actually allows us to lower that number at a very, very limited extra additional cost. Instead of cooling everything by air, which you just blow in to the data centers, instead we actually add a small liquid cooler to every processing unit within the data center. And by that, we can actually reduce the total power consumption of a data center by 25%, just by adding a water cooler instead of an air cooler, which in itself actually sounds like a really good idea. I'm also pleased to hear some of my fellow panelists here saying we buy green energy to supply all our data centers, which is actually very nice, because green energy, of course, is much better. But just because it's green energy, should we then allow ourselves to, I'll not say waste it, but I understand what Jake is saying and what Rikke is saying. If we have data centers placed in countries similar to Denmark, which is nice and cold, you more or less just open the window and let all that excess heat flow out the window, which is perfectly okay. But again, if you then turn into some more technical solutions, instead of just wasting that heat, you could return it to some of these district heating systems that Rikke also mentioned. And one of the benefits of liquid cooling instead of the air cooling is actually that we can control the temperature going out of all of these data centers, meaning that instead of having power conversions or energy conversions like Jake stated, we can actually reuse the waste heat directly from the data centers. It could be, as we do in Denmark, where it's nice and cold during the winter time, we can actually use it to heat up all the houses. We made some small calculations recently that we could actually, with the power consumption or the data centers in Denmark alone, we could heat 4 major cities in Denmark completely by waste heat of data centers, which actually is interesting. If you look at a European perspective, we have 11 capitals in the EU which could actually be heated completely by waste heat from a data center. Another thing I actually also like hearing is this that Eric mentioned, that you know a lot about these huge hyperscalers like Amazon, Google, Facebook. And of course, they are a huge contributor to this area. But it's nice to hear Eric also saying we have a lot of on-premises data centers as well that might actually also help us on this green conversion. One of those data centers is actually located here in Aalborg. Just behind me is, maybe it's stretching it a bit, calling it a data center, but it's one server rack standing behind me, doing a lot of computation for stuff we do in-house. And that one is actually connected directly to the district heating system of Aalborg, meaning that one data center or one server rack that we have placed here in Aalborg is actually heating up houses in Aalborg as we speak. And you can only imagine that a very small data center or server rack with very old technology in Aalborg is just a small drop in the ocean here if we manage to reuse a lot of the let's call it waste heat from a lot of these data centers. It could help the green conversion enormously. Yeah, I think that's my initial statement here.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It was quite interesting to me, at least, to hear that you can heat for cities in Denmark with the waste heat from data centers. So thank you once again. As I promised to Nicolas, I'm getting back to you on the Energy Efficiency Directive proposal, because I think we could use some, let's say, taking a deep dive into some of the measures that the European Commission is putting forward in this directive from the data center perspective. So if you can take 2-3 minutes to just really put all these measures in this context.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudia. I mean, we can identify, let's say, 3 areas. One is that we ask to use green procurement when it comes that public authorities are asking for such services, data center or cloud services. And I think, I mean, we all think that there is a lot more even that we could do in this direction, but I think it must be a coordinated activity, and also it's not easy, of course, to put obligations in that sense, right, on what, from where organizations should buy services and products. There is a second direction that we're moving, which, of course, it was mentioned already, is the reuse of waste heat. Again, of course, you understand there are many arguments around about what is the technical feasibility or the economic feasibility, depending on the myriads of different configuration, geographic locations, cooling technologies that are used. Does it make sense to use extra equipment as heat pumps, etc., to raise the temperature? I mean, the discussion is almost limitless. But what, of course, we try to say is to put a bit more, a slight push, right? At least from size up to have at least a clear analysis or cost-benefit analysis of, is this possible? If yes, maybe you should do it. If not, okay. Again, it's a first step, because right now, in most cases, there is not even an analysis or if this is technically or economic possible, or if it makes sense economically. So, and we all know that if something is proven to be feasible on paper, then you are halfway there doing it. And of course, the third direction, which is the most, let's say, visible for those that have read or are dealing with the proposal for the ED recast, is, as I said, the reporting obligation. Because there also, I think there are some interesting byproducts, if I might say it, of that, or connotations. I mean, because at some point, in order to make this work, it means that we have to propose what is essentially a large data center. I mean, we call it right now over a threshold of significant energy consumption. So, but as you know, when the legislation or the regulation reaches a point where puts a threshold, already that puts some starts to create the categories of what is a large or a significant data center and what is a maybe a small one, but okay. There is, for example, the effort and what we have to define to define what would be the indicators. And for that, of course, we have made it clear that we want to work together with all relevant stakeholders. I mean, industry, initiatives, academics, etc. But again, the importance here is that, of course, if the European Union comes out with a set of indicators to measure sustainability of data centers, that's also a very important signal. I mean, it's something that cannot go unnoticed or without influence. So, of course, we understand the responsibility of that, but also we understand the opportunity that there is really to push for some things. I mean, we've talked with many categories of the industry, and we see all these, we have heard all different positions. I think it was mentioned, I mean, even people saying that, experts saying that, you know, the water dimension is not adequately, for example, mentioned. It's only about energy or only about renewables. We heard also, I read in the chat, some participants asking about the waste, for example. Okay, that's another legislation's scope, but still there are even more dimensions that someone could go and discuss on how to push for greener data centers.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for listing all these proposed measures. I will take this opportunity to also add that Digital Europe supports the efforts to better measure the progress of the data center sector towards climate neutrality. And of course, members recognize the importance of monitoring and tracking the progress of all sectors towards sustainability goals. Of course, in a recent position paper, Digital Europe's members welcome the energy efficiency first principle, as the sector itself has been taking solid steps towards minimizing its own energy consumption. There is still some work ahead of us to identify suitable data and sustainability indicators that data center operators have the capability to report on. Digital Europe is, of course, ready to provide its views on how to best track progress towards climate neutrality, whilst also ensuring a level playing field for the data center industry in Europe. Eric, I'm going to move to you now because I would like to ask you, what are some recommendations you could share with policymakers to ensure further efficiency gains based on what has been discussed and also our position?
Thank you. That's a really great question. So my position is really similar to what Nicolas just said and what you just emphasized, Claudia. So I do think that the policymakers, if we take a step back, there have been a lot of great policy initiatives around the world, in the US and Europe, for incentivizing efficient technologies, funding R&D for next generation computing or data center management practices, knowledge sharing. All of these policy initiatives have been helpful for both raising the visibility of the importance of energy efficiency for the industry and getting some preliminary data on how well the industry is doing. Currently, what we have now is something known as PUE. This is the power utilization effectiveness. It's a metric that is useful, but in only limited ways. It gives us a sense of how efficiently data centers are cooling and providing power to their IT equipment. But I think we need to move much beyond that. So I'm a big proponent of gathering more data for this sector for the reasons that have already been discussed, right? It gets back to the old adage that you can't manage what you can't measure. And if we think about data centers as a sector, we're in a very poor position to measure the overall energy use and efficiency from a policy perspective and even a research perspective. If we look at other major energy using sectors, the building sector, the transport sector, we have a lot better and more granular data to understand their energy use and what drives their energy use. So I would second the recommendation to, number one, have policymakers help motivate and even potentially require more data reporting and transparency among data centers. And from an academic perspective, clearly the more data, the better. But I recognize that there are limits to the data that can be collected. We'll probably never get data all the way down to the small closets that are and small rooms that are existing, you know, on a university campus like where I work. But having some threshold that gets at a lot of the small data centers would certainly be helpful, because that would just provide a lot more visibility and give all of us just better numbers. Right now, the numbers we have are all estimates, and as I mentioned, they vary quite a bit based on the assumptions made by the analysts. So that's one, and there are models for that around the world for other sectors. I personally believe that it can be done with the right sorts of data requests, and it would add a lot of value. But the second aspect, which is something else that Nicholas mentioned and is working on, which is absolutely great, is coming up with sustainability metrics for the data center industry. And this is not going to be an easy task. I know that there has been work already trying to assess how to measure the efficiency of data centers, but my strong recommendation is for policymakers to really double down and invest in this activity, because many data centers are different, right? There's not one, in my opinion, there's not one single efficiency metric that will work for a data center that performs high performance computing or AI, and that same metric could be compared to a data center that's hosting streaming video. These are completely different services with different types of workloads. So understanding these differences and coming up with metrics that are going to be credible and useful for tracking, incentivizing, and even standardizing the efficiency of data centers requires work, and it requires bringing together many stakeholders, academics, the data center industry, policymakers, to begin really working on what these metrics could look like. That's a role for policymakers, to serve as a convener, to serve as a funder even, to commission studies, to bring the world closer to defining those metrics. Because what we have now, PUE and the occasional report coming from the occasional company, doesn't really give us the information we need to know where we stand and, you know, what's possible and what pace of efficiency improvement should really be incentivized. All of that comes back to having those key metrics. So it's heartening to know that there is some work going on, but my recommendation is policymakers can do a lot more to accelerate that, because once we have those metrics, then it opens up a lot of possibilities for really driving efficiency improvements, where right now we're not really quite sure where to go besides general incentives for things that matter, but we can't really measure how fast they're moving us in the right direction. So that's my my soapbox comment.
Thank you very much, Eric. As a matter of fact, I will stay with you for another minute or so, because I see in the chat there's a flourishing conversation going on with a lot of thoughts and opinions being shared. Eric, what I want to ask you, because I've noticed someone asking this question in the chat as well. How long do you reckon that the current efficiency trends can last for, actually?
Okay. That's a question. It's a great question. And I would say that it's one that's really impossible to answer. But let me see if I can offer some very brief perspective. So the first thing to recognize is that there are multiple layers to efficiency. So I think we all understand hardware efficiency, the sort of Moore's law, Dennard scaling gains that we've seen in the past. And it's clear that that's slowing down, right? So we've got the efficiency of the hardware. There's also efficiency of software, which is something we don't think about quite often. How efficient are the applications at using the computational resources they have? And what we're seeing in the research community is that there's a lot of inefficiency in software. And then the last layer is the efficiency of cooling systems and power provision systems. So there are opportunities at all three of those layers. And we have existing opportunities, so best practices that many large-scale data centers have already tapped. But as I mentioned in the chat, there are a lot of smaller data centers that are still fairly efficient. So there still is some potential to bring those data centers up to best practices and save energy. But moving forward, what it's going to take is continued innovation in all three of those layers. And I won't even hazard a guess as to how long we have before efficiency gains run out, because I see a lot of innovation out there. So I mentioned a few in the chat. Liquid cooling could help reduce the PUE of lots of data centers. On the computational side, we're seeing a lot of exciting developments in using GPUs for certain types of computation, certain types of workloads where they're just much more efficient than CPUs. pairing software with the right types of processors to design the whole system in a more efficient way. I have colleagues here at UCSB who are working on optical chips, which are much more energy efficient for certain types of workloads. So there is hope that there is innovation in the pipeline. How soon that innovation will come to market, whether it will be adopted, and the extent to which those efficiency gains can offset continued demand. We know demand is going up. We know that's going to continue. So the question is, by how much could a future efficiency gains moderate future growth? It's anyone's guess, but I'm hopeful that there's still some bandwidth for adopting current efficiency practices, and that there are efficient technologies coming down the pike where I don't think that we're going to see wild exponential growth at least in the next 5 to 10 years. I do think there will be some growth, but I think that some of the efficiency innovations that are out there and that have hope could at least help moderate some of that growth. And the last thing I'll say is, when I talk to folks in the semiconductor industry and the tech industry, they tell me that they've been hearing that Moore's law has ended for years, but there's always some innovation that pushes computational efficiency further along. So this is an industry that has historically produced lots and lots of innovation. There's still some left. So that would be my answer, a little bit of a hedge there. I'm hopeful that there's efficiency left, but I would recognize that demand is rising faster than efficiency. So the challenge is trying to moderate that growth as best we can.
Thank you, Eric. So I take that we need to work to constantly and to continue working on innovation in this area, which is why I also want to build on other comments in the chat and ask Jake, actually, Jake, from a company perspective, maybe, or an industry perspective, depending on which one you want to approach. What are some of the challenges of data center operators in keeping data centers sustainable? And of course, you can build also on Eric's input as well.
Yeah, no, and Eric's comments are really helpful framing, and I know I'm also trying to follow the chat while we have this discussion as well. And I think when we look at data centers across Europe and ways to increase efficiency or continue to drive efficiency gains, one of the things that we have seen, and I think has been talked a little bit of here, is the efficiency gains that can be had by the very simple thing of moving from those smaller on-premise traditional computing systems over to cloud computing. And we just commissioned and released a study last year by 451 Research that looked at this and looked at the efficiency gains from moving from those traditional on-prem computing systems over to the AWS cloud to look at what are those gains, what is that delta, how much energy savings could be had. And what we found was that moving from a typical European on-prem data center to the AWS cloud could reduce energy use by up to 80%. That is because of exactly what you're asking, right? Which is because of cloud providers are operating servers at higher utilization rates. We're designing facilities to use less energy and water. So we're making those technological advances that are helping to drive that energy efficiency, which helps create that delta. Then, for us, because we're so focused on our goal to be net zero carbon and our goal to be 100% renewable, we found that businesses could reduce the carbon footprint of an average workload when they moved from on-prem to the AWS cloud by 96% when we reach 100% renewable energy. And so those advances and those gains from moving from on-prem over to the AWS cloud and large cloud computing systems is just where there's a lot of energy efficiency to be gained. And I think, there's been a lot of conversations here around some of these other technologies, and I could talk about we have a project where we're working with a district heating system in Ireland, and that was a conversation for a while ago. And we also just launched something that I won't take too much time to talk about, called a well-architected pillar, a sustainability pillar, or a well-architected framework. And I know it was discussed before, how do we make not just the hardware efficient, but how do we encourage efficiency in the cloud? And it's fairly technical, and frankly, it's beyond my technical capabilities. But we're working with customers to help them do this and show them how they can maximize utilization, how they can use managed services to minimize impact, and they can automate sustainability best practices. So things like adjusting compute capacity or moving infrequently accessed data over to cold storage. And so that's working together with our customers to design for sustainability and help achieve our shared goals. I think it's a little bit of a sample of some of the stuff we're doing in that space. And I'm sure, you asked about the industry. I know that our peers are also working hard in this space too.
Thank you very much, Jake. And I will continue building on on the discussion in the chat and address the next question to Thomas. Actually, someone is asking how far away should, when you want to reuse the waste heat, how far away a data center should be? Some of them are really far away. Some of them are not that far away. What's your views on this?
Quite naturally, the closer the data center is to the district heating producer, the better. For sure, but at least we have one example in Denmark, just outside of Viborg, where it's actually located. I think it's 15 kilometers away, which is still okay. It highly depends on the temperature you get on the energy and what the water that you are sending back to the district heating system. So, of course, there are some limits, but I would claim that's not the biggest problem right now. Actually, the limits you can place them relatively far away. Maybe a bigger problem is actually making sure that the quality of the energy that you send back is actually something that is usable without having to add additional energy just to get it up to a level where you can actually reuse it and send it back. I'm not saying that heat pumps is a bad solution, because they are very much used in data centers today, and they are good. But the problem is, if you want to connect it directly to the district heating system, the temperature of the water is actually too low, so they can't get it back to the district heating producer at a temperature that is usable. So for sure, that's something that also needs to be looked into. And if I may add a small comment to this PoE thing that Eric mentioned, that's actually quite nice, and I think the industry has for a while been chasing to get a number very close to 1, meaning that we're more or less using all the energy that we put in. But only imagine if you somehow by regulations or demands from the politicians actually said you need to reuse the heat that you create, and thereby actually maybe getting to a PUE below 1. So actually all of these data centers could actually be contributing to creating energy that could be used for everyone else. And quite naturally, I would advocate for district heating and water, but there are other means actually to reuse that heat. Could turn it into electricity again or something else. And of course, cold areas like Denmark, we like the heat, but I'm quite convinced if you go to Spain and Italy, they are not that convinced that district heating is the best solution, because they have enough heat in those areas. But in that areas, there might be electricity or used for some kind of cooling. So maybe just reusing the good green energy you get from wind turbines or solar panels and everything, and maybe reusing that and converting that into something that could be used again. But I think that would call for regulations from Pernille and some of her colleagues in the parliament, maybe.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas, for sure. All this information that was shared today will be of great use to our policymakers on who are with us today. And as a matter of fact, there's someone in the chat saying that district heating is actually not the only potential use for heat reuse. We can also consider standalone off-takers in the area of food production and fish farming. So plenty of thoughts to take away from here. Also, just in 1 minute, Rikke, I will just, I think this will be the last question from my side. I just want to ask you, from your view, is there one or maybe you have 2 ideas on how other national trade associations actually can work with policymakers at national level to ensure that data centers become sustainable, and that actually policymakers, get some insights from us as trade associations. Just very 1 or 2 minutes.
Sorry, I think that the cooperation is one of the key words here, and I also think that you need. I also talked about that we need the cooperation in EU to have that we are on we get the same laws throughout the EU, and it starts also at the national level, and have these discussions with the parliaments at all time, having both the transparency and having putting clear what is actually the barriers for actually moving forward. As I said, in Denmark, we have some issues about the taxation. We have some issues about this mapping that no one have the overview of where actually is best to place the data centers. And you have to make sure that that these obstacles and barriers is put forward for the parliaments. And then one of my key points always is cooperation, and that not only cooperation between parliament and the trade associations nationally. We need to solve this also in a European level. So we also need the cooperation at the EU level as well as the national level.
Thank you very much, Rikke. And we're actually nearing the end of this discussion on data centers and their role in the green and digital transition. Of course, we can go for many, many hours because it's such an interesting debate. And there are so many interesting insights. Before wrapping up, I'd actually like to invite first Cecilia and then Mrs. Weiss to share with us a few closing remarks based on these various perspectives we've come to better understand today. So maybe 1 or 2 minutes at the most.
So thank you very much, and Rikke, I think you triggered, a dialogue on how one of the smaller countries in Europe are actually walking in front and reusing heat and other things that is quite new to other nations in Europe. So hopefully Denmark can also serve as a front runner country for many, and inspiration for the rest of the council when the ministers will meet. Well, I can only say that. We are actually in Digital Europe. We have joined, and we are leading industry outreach on something called the Green Deal Coalition. It is a coalition where we are basically defining metrics for how to measure the impact of technology on other industries, but also in general how to measure energy consumption or energy reductions by use of technology. So it might actually be a forum where we can start this discussion across several international organizations, companies, and governments on how to measure things. And I totally do agree. I mean, you can't manage what you can measure. So somehow, how do we make sure that we have the right targets and we have the right metrics to actually monitor this, both on data centers themselves, but of course also on the effect on other industries. And last but not least, regulation is definitely one option. Maybe we should even look at what is the existing regulations in place, and are there minor tweaks that we actually can do. And then of course it's all about enforcement. Sometimes the most troublesome is actually to get all the member states to do the same, or at least implement the regulations and the rules in the same way. So yes to regulation if it brings us forward in a proactive how can you say manner towards bringing down CO2 and increase energy efficiency, and maybe we can start by looking what is exactly in place already. So with that, I mean, first of all, thank you so much to all these excellent panelists. I think it was really interesting to see the different competences, right? We have really deep dive on how these data centers work, and then also with Rikke and with Eric and with Thomas, a knowledge on how this can be done with the concrete examples. So a big thank you from me to you and for basically spending your time here. And let's make it happen. If it's all about walking the talk, and it's all about suggesting how to measure it and how to implement it, and if somebody can do it, it's us.
Maybe I can also ask Pernille if you want to say a few words.
Well, one big thank you for all the very, very interesting input, and especially like you also underlined, Cecilia, there is a good dialogue in between data centers and whom can help them. So I'm really harvesting a lot of ideas of what are the instruments that we need to work on. First and foremost, in order to make EU really and still to be the innovative continent. so that what we do introduces energy efficiency first in practice, but also that we do it in a way where we still continue to have a flexible, agile framework for how the digital sector, together with all other sectors, can co-create in terms of keeping the union to meet the zero carbon reduction target by 2050, and also after that. That must be the pivotal ambition for all of us, and I know I share that with many colleagues in the European Parliament. Also, I think it's very, very interesting what you have been all talking about concerning data and metrics. I really hope to see within the next couple of weeks some very relevant specific input from your side, because I know that there has been some critique on the requirements from the Commission side on the data traffic and the amount of data stored and processed in the data center. So please be aware of on that critique and send to me whatever relevant information you have, so that we can do the amendments with a wording that is innovative, but of course also that supports the increase of energy efficiency. The last thing I will say was the input on where to place data centers in the future, and not go into this blind gutter of imagining that it can only be in relationship to district heating, because also mentioned that it's not all over Europe that we have district heating systems. So this standalone projects also in industry areas in the rural areas is very relevant. And I know that in Kalundborg, of all places in Denmark, there is a very interesting cooperation in between very different industries where they kind of make their energy circulate in between their plants. And thinking like that will make the EU really both a very innovative and energy efficient union. And I hope that will happen as soon as possible. Thank you so much, Claudia, for making this year also a very pleasant ride in between a lot of perspectives and very relevant questions that you orchestrate in between the panelists. I'm very grateful for your effort, and of course for the architecture from Digital Europe to provide us such a valuable afternoon. Thank you all.
I thank you very much, Pernille. I thank you very much, Cecilia, for all these interesting conclusions. Pernille, I also want to thank you and your team for co-organizing.
I will pass that on, of course.
We put in a lot of effort. I also thank our distinguished speakers today, Thomas, Rikke, Nicolas, Eric, and Jake, for all your interesting insights and for helping us to better understand how data centers are actually working towards becoming climate neutral, and at the same time actually facilitating reductions in carbon emissions in other sectors of the economy. I thank you all once again for all your time and attention, also to our participants and for their questions and the very lively debates in the chat. I wish you all a good day ahead. So thank you and goodbye.